I had been planning the surprise for months, and the day was finally here. Claire and I had been married for 12 years, and every anniversary felt like a new milestone worth celebrating. This year, I wanted to go all out. She deserved it, at least that's what I told myself. I rented out a private room at her favorite restaurant, invited all our close friends, and even managed to wrangle her parents and sister to fly in from out of state. It was going to be a night to remember. The day began like any other Thursday. Claire left early for work, mentioning she had a big presentation at the office. She kissed me on the cheek and promised to be home by 6:30 p.m. so we could keep things casual for our anniversary. Little did she know, I had already arranged for her coworker to keep her out until it was time to bring her to the party. Her reaction would be priceless. By noon, I was knee-deep in party preparations. Balloons, lights, catering, it all needed to be perfect. I made sure to include Claire's favorite details: lavender-scented candles, a playlist of her favorite songs, and even a slideshow of pictures from our years together. I had no doubt this would sweep her off her feet. Around 5 p.m., guests started arriving. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, whispering about how Claire would love this surprise. Her sister, Amanda, gave me a knowing smile. "You really outdid yourself this time, Dan," she said. "Claire's going to cry happy tears when she sees all of this." I laughed nervously, brushing off the compliment. There was a weird knot in my stomach, not nerves, exactly, but something I couldn't place. I chalked it up to excitement. By 6:45, the room was packed. Friends mingled, champagne glasses clinked, and the restaurant staff helped finalize the last-minute touches. Claire's coworker texted me that they were 5 minutes away. Showtime. When the door swung open, Claire walked in, her hand covering her mouth in shock. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, her eyes darting around the room. "Dan! What is this?" "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. Everyone clapped and cheered as Claire's eyes glistened with what I thought were happy tears. She gave a heartfelt thank you speech, hugging every guest and repeatedly telling me I was the best husband ever. But there was something off. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and she seemed distracted. I noticed her checking her phone more than usual, her expression flickering between guilt and apprehension. I tried to push the thought away. She was probably just overwhelmed. The evening carried on with laughter, good food, and endless toasts to love and commitment. By all appearances, the party was a resounding success. Claire even kissed me in front of everyone, saying how lucky she was to have me. Yet that knot in my stomach tightened. As the night wound down, I left the table to grab the slideshow projector from the car. That's when I saw it, a text notification lighting up Claire's phone, which she had left on the table. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. Hope he doesn't suspect a thing." My heart stopped. I froze, staring at Claire's phone as if it had grown teeth and bit me. The words on the screen burned into my mind. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Hope he doesn't suspect a thing." The laughter and clinking glasses around me faded into white noise. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my breath came short. It took everything in me not to grab the phone and scroll through every message. But with dozens of people in the room, that wasn't exactly an option. Instead, I slipped back into my seat, trying to act normal. My heart was racing, my mind a whirl of questions and scenarios I didn't want to face. Claire turned to me, beaming, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. "You okay, babe?" she asked, her hand brushing my arm. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I think. Long day." The party continued as though nothing had happened, but I barely registered the rest of it. My friends and family seemed none the wiser, though Claire's sister, Amanda, shot me a curious glance once or twice. When the last guest left, I busied myself cleaning up to avoid talking too much. Claire was humming softly, clearly pleased with how the night had gone. I couldn't help but feel sick. As she loaded the last of the dishes into the sink, I turned to her. "Hey, mind if I borrow your phone? Mine died," and I need to check the weather for tomorrow. It was a weak excuse, but it was the best I could come up with in the moment. Claire froze for half a second before casually replying, "Oh, sure, but I need to plug it in. It's almost dead too." She unplugged the charger and handed it to me with a smile, but her eyes darted to the screen as she did. My hands trembled as I held it. I opened the weather app to make it look like I was doing exactly what I said I would, but my focus was on the texts. The incriminating one was gone, deleted. "Thanks," I said, handing it back, my voice strained. "I'll grab a shower." "Okay, don't be too long," she called after me. I shut the bathroom door, locking it behind me as I sat on the edge of the tub, my head in my hands. Who was the text from? Was this real, or was I misreading something? My mind replayed the message over and over. "Hope he doesn't suspect a thing." My gut told me exactly what it meant, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. I needed proof. The next day, I worked from home, claiming I needed quiet to focus on a big project. In reality, I used the time to dig. I installed a tracking app on her phone while she was in the shower that morning. It would mirror her texts, calls, and locations directly to mine. I hated myself for doing it, but I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut. That evening, she kissed me goodbye, saying she had to stay late at work to wrap up her big presentation. I played along, pretending not to notice how carefully she had done her makeup or the subtle spritz of the perfume I'd given her for her birthday. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I opened the tracking app. Her location popped up almost immediately. She wasn't heading to her office. Instead, she was driving toward a small boutique hotel downtown. My hands trembled as I watched the little blue dot on the tracking app inch closer to the hotel. Every part of me screamed to jump in my car and follow her, but I held back. This wasn't a movie where I could barge into some hotel room and demand answers. I needed to be smart. I needed undeniable proof. The drive took her about 20 minutes, during which I paced the living room like a caged animal. When her location finally stopped at the Redwood Hotel, I stared at the screen, waiting for something, anything, to make sense. At first, nothing happened. 10 agonizing minutes passed. Then a notification from the app buzzed on my phone. She'd received a text. "Room 214. Doors open. Can't wait." I stared at the message, my stomach twisting into knots. My heart wanted this to be some terrible misunderstanding, but my gut knew better. Claire wasn't working late. She was meeting someone. And it sure as hell wasn't for a business presentation. I spent the next hour alternating between staring at the tracking app and convincing myself to stay put. Every logical part of me knew I couldn't confront her without knowing exactly what was going on. If I did, she'd deny it, spin it into something innocent. But how could I just sit here? I decided I couldn't. Grabbing my coat, I headed for the door. I didn't have a plan, but I couldn't sit in that house for another second. The drive to the hotel was a blur, my thoughts racing faster than the car. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, it was nearing 8 p.m. The lights from the building glowed warmly, an inviting facade masking whatever betrayal lurked inside. I parked in a spot with a clear view of the entrance and waited. Her car was there, parked in the corner. It wasn't hard to spot. The vanity plate with her initials gave it away immediately. I didn't know what I expected, but after about 15 minutes, the front door opened. My breath hitched as I saw her. Claire stepped out, laughing softly, her hand brushing the arm of a man who followed her. I didn't recognize him, but his posture screamed confidence, and his smile was the kind of smug that made my blood boil. He was tall, dark-haired, and sharply dressed, a sharp contrast to my jeans and hoodie. They paused outside the entrance, her laughter floating through the air as she playfully pushed his chest. He leaned in closer, and though I couldn't hear their conversation, the body language told me all I needed to know. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it, proof enough for anyone to see. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. When they disappeared back inside, I knew I had to act fast. I exited my car and slipped into the hotel lobby, keeping my head low. The receptionist was busy with another guest, so I walked briskly to the elevator. I didn't have a plan, but my instincts drove me forward. When I reached the second floor, I saw a maid pushing a cart. Taking a chance, I stopped her. "Excuse me, I think my wife dropped her room key. She's in 214. Could you let me in?" The maid hesitated, looking me over. I added, "She's not answering her phone, and I just need to grab something for her. I promise it'll only take a second." Reluctantly, she pulled out a master keycard and opened the door. "You'll need to be quick," she said, glancing down the hallway nervously. As soon as the door clicked open, I stepped inside. The room was quiet, the bed unmade, and a pair of wine glasses sat on the nightstand. I spotted her scarf draped over the chair in the corner, and next to it, a man's tie. But it was the phone charging on the desk that caught my attention. It wasn't hers. I grabbed it, scrolling through the messages, and my stomach turned. Every text, every photo, it was all there. But there was one message that stopped me cold. Should we tell him? Or just wait for the right moment at the party? The party? My party? I stumbled back into the hallway, my head spinning. The message on that phone had sent me reeling. Should we tell him? Or just wait for the right moment at the party? What were they planning? What were they going to tell me? My heart pounded in my chest as I clutched the stranger's phone. The maid gave me a confused look as I passed her in the hallway, but I didn't stop to explain. I needed to get out of there before Claire or her mystery man returned. Back in my car, I tried to catch my breath. The evidence I had was enough to confirm my worst fears. Claire was having an affair. But this new twist, this mention of the party, my party, made everything worse. Was last night's celebration just a setup? Was this entire thing part of some cruel game? I opened the phone again, scrolling through the texts with trembling fingers. Most of the messages were flirty, graphic, and laced with inside jokes I didn't understand. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Last night was perfect. He didn't suspect a thing. I can't wait to see his face when he finds out. My face. When I find out what? The weight of it all was crushing me. I felt like the air was being sucked out of my lungs, but I couldn't sit there paralyzed. I needed answers. Claire hadn't just betrayed me with her affair, she was playing some kind of sick game, and I was the fool at the center of it. I started the car and drove home, my grip on the steering wheel like a vice. The tracking app showed that Claire was still at the hotel. I had some time before she came back, which meant I could dig further. Once I got home, I went straight to my office. I powered up my laptop and started piecing everything together. I reviewed the messages from the phone, cross-referencing dates and locations. I checked our bank statements, something I hadn't done in weeks, and my stomach churned when I saw several large, unexplained withdrawals. One of them matched the date of a jewelry store purchase. A quick Google search confirmed it was a high-end shop in town. She hadn't bought anything for me. I opened the calendar app we shared. Claire had marked that she had work trips, meetings, and conferences over the past few months. All lies, I now realized. But then I saw a note for next Saturday. Big reveal, don't forget! What the hell was the big reveal? It felt like the walls were closing in, but I pushed forward. If they were planning something, I wasn't going to let them blindside me. I was still poring over details when the sound of Claire's car pulling into the driveway jolted me. Quickly, I shoved my laptop and shoved the stranger's phone into my desk drawer. I couldn't let her know what I'd found. Not yet. The front door opened, and I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Dan?" she called out, her voice as cheerful as ever. I stepped out of my office, plastering on a neutral expression. "Hey, how was work?" "Exhausting," she said, setting her purse down. "We were finalizing the presentation all evening." I forced a smile, trying to ignore the bow rising in my throat. "Sounds intense." She walked over, wrapping her arms around my waist. The scent of her perfume, the same perfume she'd worn to the hotel, hit me like a punch to the gut. "I'm just glad it's over," she said, leaning in to kiss me. I kissed her back, but my mind was a storm. As we stood there, I made a silent vow: I wouldn't confront her yet. I would play my part, just as she was playing hers. But when the big reveal came, I'd be ready. And they wouldn't see me coming. The next few days felt like walking on a tightrope. Every conversation, every interaction with Claire was charged with tension I fought to hide. She acted as though nothing was wrong, like she was still the loving wife who had been so grateful for the surprise party I'd thrown her. But now, every word she spoke felt like a lie. I kept my cool, but inside, I was unraveling. Her phone gave me nothing new, she had wiped her messages clean. But the phone I had taken from the hotel, her lover's phone, told a much darker story. I spent every free moment combing through it. The texts between him and Claire painted a clear picture. This wasn't just some fling. It had been going on for months. They had nicknames for each other, plans for weekends away, even inside jokes about how clueless I was. But there was something else that stood out. A name kept popping up in their conversations: Greg. At first, I thought it was just another mutual friend they were joking about. But then I found a message that made me sit up straight. Greg says everything's set for next weekend. Are you sure Dan won't figure it out? Greg. My stomach churned as I tried to piece it together. The only Greg I could think of was her boss, Greg Allen, the CEO of her company. I had met him once at a holiday party, a charismatic guy in his late 40s who spent a little too much time hovering near Claire. Was he part of this? What the hell could everything's set mean? I had no idea, but I was determined to find out. 2 days later, Claire casually mentioned something over breakfast. By the way, she said, sipping her coffee, Greg invited us to dinner on Saturday. He's hosting a little thing for the team, and I thought it'd be nice if we went together. My hand froze mid-reach for the butter knife. Saturday. The same day marked as the big reveal in her calendar. Dinner at his place? I asked, keeping my voice light. Yeah, she replied, glancing at her phone. Just a casual thing. He's been super supportive with the project, so it's kind of a celebration. I forced a smile. Sounds great. Let me know what time. But inside, I was seething. Greg Allen wasn't just some supportive boss. He was somehow tied to whatever this big reveal was supposed to be. That night, after Claire went to bed, I pulled out the phone from the hotel and scrolled through the messages again. I searched for Greg's number, comparing it with the texts Claire had sent. And there it was. A text from Claire to her lover. Greg's on board. He says we just need to get through the dinner, and after that, everything will be in place. The dinner wasn't just a team event, it was a setup. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I put together a plan of my own. If they thought I was clueless, they were dead wrong. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. First, I contacted a private investigator, someone discreet who could gather evidence fast. I wanted to know everything about Greg, Claire, and whoever this lover of hers was. I wasn't just looking for proof of infidelity anymore. I wanted to know what they were planning. Next, I started preparing for the dinner. I didn't know exactly what I was walking into, but I was determined to keep my cool and play along. Let them think I was still the unsuspecting husband. Let them think they had the upper hand. By the time Saturday rolled around, I felt ready. Nervous, yes, but ready. Claire was unusually cheerful as she got dressed for the evening, humming to herself as she applied her makeup. She looked radiant, and it killed me to know she was putting in all this effort for him. You look beautiful, I said, and the words tasted bitter in my mouth. She smiled, leaning in to kiss me. Thanks, babe. You clean up pretty well yourself. We arrived at Greg's house just after 7 p.m. It was a sprawling place in the suburbs, with a perfectly manicured lawn and expensive cars lining the driveway. Claire seemed at ease, but I was hyper-aware of everything. The way her hand lingered on Greg's arm when he greeted us. The way his eyes lingered a little too long on her dress. Inside, the room was filled with Claire's coworkers, most of whom I recognized from office parties. Everyone was chatting, laughing, sipping on wine. To an outsider, it looked like a normal, casual gathering. But I wasn't an outsider. As the evening wore on, I kept close to Claire, watching her every move. She introduced me to a few people, but I could tell she was tense. Her eyes kept darting toward Greg and another man in the corner, a tall, dark-haired guy I didn't recognize. It wasn't until dessert that things started to fall into place. Greg tapped his glass to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, grinning, "thank you for coming tonight. I know we've all been working hard, but I wanted to take a moment to celebrate something special." My pulse quickened as the room fell silent. Claire's hand rested lightly on my arm, but I could feel her tension. "Claire," Greg said, his grin widening, "why don't you do the honors?" Claire stood, her cheeks flushed. For a moment she hesitated, glancing at me. And then she smiled. "Everyone," she began, "I've been keeping this under wraps for a while now, but tonight feels like the perfect time to share the news." I held my breath, every muscle in my body taut. "Dan, sweetheart," she said, turning to me with a glimmer in her eye, "there's something I need to tell you." Claire's voice seemed to echo in my ears, louder than the murmur of the crowd or the clinking of glasses. She smiled at me, the picture of grace and composure, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Guilt? Defiance? I couldn't tell. "Dan," she said again, her tone steady but her fingers trembling slightly as she clasped her hands in front of her. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I wasn't sure how. I needed to make sure everything was in place before tonight." She paused, glancing at Greg, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she about to confess? Was this the moment she'd tell me about her affair? About her lover? About whatever this big reveal was supposed to be? She took a deep breath and said, "Greg and I have been working on something incredible. It's a new opportunity for me, one I never thought I'd have. He's promoting me to head of the new Chicago branch." Applause broke out around the room, and I struggled to keep my expression neutral. My jaw tightened, but I forced a smile as Claire turned to me, beaming. "Isn't that amazing, Dan?" she asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "It's going to be a huge step for my career." "Chicago?" I managed to say, my voice calm even as my mind reeled. "That's unexpected." "I know," she said quickly, her hand squeezing my arm. "But it's an incredible opportunity. And don't worry, it won't happen for a couple of months, so we have time to figure everything out." The room erupted in chatter, with coworkers congratulating her and Greg clinking his glass for a toast. I nodded along, pretending to listen, but my thoughts were spiraling. This wasn't the big reveal I'd been expecting, but it still didn't feel right. Claire's reaction was too rehearsed, her enthusiasm too polished. And Greg, he was watching me with a smirk that I wanted to wipe off his face. As the dinner wound down, Claire excused herself to the restroom, leaving me alone near the dessert table. That's when Greg approached, his wine glass in hand. "Dan," he said smoothly, clapping me on the shoulder, "you must be so proud of Claire. She's been an absolute rock star these last few months. I can't imagine anyone better for the job." "Sure," I said, forcing a tight smile. "She's worked hard. But Chicago's a big move. Did she ask for this or—" Greg chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass. No, I approached her. Someone with her talent deserves to shine on a bigger stage, you know?" He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "And between you and me, I think she was ready for a change. She's got so much potential, just needed the right push." The way he said it made my skin crawl, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. When Claire returned, Greg excused himself to mingle with other guests. She slipped her arm around my waist, smiling up at me. "What do you think?" she asked softly. "You're okay with this, right?" "Of course," I said, kissing her temple. "We'll figure it out. It's a great opportunity for you." But inside, I was seething. This wasn't just about a promotion. It was bigger than that, I could feel it. And I wasn't going to let her or Greg pull the wool over my eyes any longer. That night, as we drove home, Claire talked excitedly about her plans for Chicago, the apartment she'd need, the schools she wanted to scout out for potential students she might help through her firm's charitable initiatives. I nodded in all the right places, keeping my voice warm and supportive. But the moment she fell asleep that night, I was back in my office, poring over the evidence. Greg's name kept coming up in texts on the phone I'd taken from the hotel. He wasn't just her boss, he was involved in everything. And then I saw it. A message from Greg to Claire's lover. After the move, everything will be easier. Dan won't see it coming. The words hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning something that went beyond a promotion or a secret rendezvous. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. The next morning, Claire was in high spirits, practically glowing as she sipped her coffee at the breakfast table. She hummed softly to herself, scrolling through her phone like someone without a care in the world. The image of her looking so calm, so normal, only made my stomach churn more. "I'm going to start looking at apartments in Chicago today," she said, glancing up at me with a bright smile. "I figured we could go together next month to check out a few places." I smiled back, masking the storm brewing inside me. "Sounds like a good plan," I said casually. "You've got it all figured out, huh?" Her smile faltered slightly, just for a split second, before she recovered. "Well, I want to make it as easy as possible for both of us. It'll be a big adjustment, but we can handle it." I nodded, sipping my coffee to avoid saying something I'd regret. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew it wasn't the right time. I needed more. As soon as she left for work, I got to work myself. I called the private investigator I'd hired and updated him on what I'd uncovered so far. The message from Greg to her lover, the promotion, the carefully staged announcements, it was all too coordinated. "I need to know everything about this move," I told him. "Greg, the Chicago branch, the timeline, any other connections Claire might have. Something isn't adding up." "I'm already on it," the investigator said. "I've got a team digging into Greg Allen's financials and communications. We'll also see if there's anything shady about the Chicago branch." Hanging up, I stared at my laptop, the words of that message from Greg still burning in my mind. "After the move, everything will be easier. Dan won't see it coming." What the hell did that mean? The rest of the day dragged by as I tried to keep myself busy. I answered work emails, ran errands, anything to keep my mind off the growing sense of dread. But by the evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the phone I'd taken from the hotel, scrolling through the messages again. There had to be something I'd missed, some clue buried in the details. And then I found it. A series of texts between Claire's lover and Greg. Lover: "You sure he's not catching on?" Greg: "He's clueless. She's got him wrapped around her finger." Lover: "Good. Once the papers are signed, we're home free." Greg: "Exactly. The move is the perfect cover. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." Papers. My heart stopped. What papers? I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as the realization hit me. This wasn't just about the affair. This wasn't just about a move to Chicago. They were planning something far bigger, something that involved me. My mind raced as I tried to connect the dots. Was it about money? Property? Were they trying to take something from me? Claire came home later that night, her mood still buoyant. She kissed me on the cheek as I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV. "Long day?" she asked, running her fingers through my hair. "Yeah, but nothing I can't handle," I said, forcing a smile. She nodded, heading upstairs to change. I waited until I heard the shower running before pulling out my phone and typing a text to the investigator. "Look into our finances. Shared accounts, properties, everything. Something's happening, and I need to know what it is." As I hit send, I realized just how much was at stake. Whatever game Claire and Greg were playing, They were counting on me staying in the dark. But I wasn't going to stay clueless for long. The next morning started like any other, Claire humming in the kitchen, making her usual avocado toast while I nursed my coffee at the table. But everything felt different now. Every smile, every casual touch, every word she spoke felt like an act, a carefully constructed performance. I couldn't look at her without hearing those messages echoing in my head. Once the papers are signed, we're home free. By now, I was almost certain. This wasn't just about cheating. It was about something bigger, something that involved me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. My investigator hadn't gotten back to me yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. As Claire poured her second cup of coffee, she glanced at me with a coy smile. "What's on your agenda today?" she asked. "Just work," I said, keeping my tone light. "Nothing too exciting." "You?" "Meetings mostly," she said, leaning against the counter. "But Greg wants me to join him for a late lunch to go over some details for the Chicago transition." I nodded, pretending not to notice the slight blush that crept up her cheeks. "Sounds productive." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. As soon as Claire left, I grabbed my phone and called the investigator. "I need an update," I said, my voice tight. "You were right to be suspicious," he replied. "Your wife's been making some unusual financial moves. A couple of weeks ago, she opened a private account under her name. Greg's been transferring money into it, significant amounts." My blood ran cold. "How much?" "About $50,000 so far," he said. "But that's not the strangest part. There's a document being drawn up, some sort of legal agreement. I haven't been able to get my hands on the details yet, but I'm working on it." I sank into my chair, my mind racing. A private account? A legal agreement? It was worse than I thought. "Whatever it is, I need to see those documents," I said. "They're planning something big, and I need to be ready." "Understood," the investigator said. "I'll prioritize this and get back to you as soon as I have something concrete." After I hung up, I stared at the wall, trying to make sense of it all. Claire and Greg weren't just having an affair, they were setting up a way to cut me out of something. The money, the documents, the move to Chicago, it was all connected. But what was their endgame? I couldn't shake the feeling that they were counting on me to do nothing, to stay in the dark while they pulled the rug out from under me. Well, they'd underestimated me. That afternoon, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If they wanted to play dirty, I could too. I called my lawyer, someone I trusted implicitly. "I need your help," I said. "It's personal, and it's urgent." "Of course," he replied. "What's going on?" I told him everything, about Claire, the texts, the secret account, and the mysterious documents. "We need to be proactive," he said. "If there are legal agreements being drawn up, we'll file a discovery request to get a copy. In the meantime, I'll start putting protections in place for your assets. If they're planning to take you to court, or worse, we'll be ready." "Do it," I said, my voice firm. By the time Claire came home that evening, I was calmer. I had a plan now, and for the first time in days, I felt like I was back in control. She breezed through the door, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and her lips curved in a soft smile. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down. "How was your day?" "Good," I said, walking over to kiss her on the cheek. "Just the usual." "Same here," she replied, kicking off her heels. "Greg's really pushing to get everything in place for the move. It's a lot, but it's exciting." I nodded, watching her carefully. She was still playing her part, still pretending everything was fine. But I wasn't pretending anymore. I was ready. The days leading up to Claire's big move to Chicago were a masterclass in deception. She carried on as though everything in our lives was perfectly normal, cheerfully packing boxes, planning farewell lunches with friends, and making lists of apartment amenities she just couldn't live without. Meanwhile, I was piecing together the puzzle behind her back. The investigator came through late one night with the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. He emailed me a scanned copy of the document Claire and Greg had been working on. The subject line read, Divorce papers. My chest tightened as I opened the file. It wasn't just any divorce agreement, it was a meticulously crafted setup meant to screw me over. Claire was petitioning for full ownership of the house, half my retirement savings, and an absurd amount of monthly spousal support. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried in the fine print was an addendum stating she had already transferred funds from our joint accounts into her private account, over $100,000 in total. The money was listed as preparatory relocation expenses, but the investigator had flagged the transfers. They weren't for moving costs. They were payments to Greg's business account and to her lover's name, which the investigator now had, Aaron Michaels. I stared at the screen in disbelief, bow rising in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated theft. Claire was planning to leave me, take everything I'd worked for, and ride off into the sunset with Greg and Aaron. And she'd made sure the entire plan looked airtight. But they'd overlooked one crucial detail: me. The next morning, I met with my lawyer in person. We laid everything out on the table: the texts, the transfers, the divorce papers. He nodded grimly as I walked him through it. "They're trying to box you in," he said, leaning back in his chair. "If you hadn't caught this in time, she could have blindsided you in court. But now we've got leverage." "What do we do?" I asked. "We fight fire with fire," he replied. "First, we'll freeze the joint accounts so she can't siphon off any more money. Then we'll file a counter-petition for divorce on the grounds of financial misconduct and infidelity. We'll request full discovery on Greg's finances and hers. If she wants a fight, she's going to get one." I left the office with a renewed sense of purpose. The anger I'd been suppressing for weeks was finally channeled into action. Claire thought she'd won, but she didn't know I was already 3 steps ahead. That evening, I kept my poker face as Claire prattled on about her upcoming trip to Chicago to finalize her apartment. She smiled as she scrolled through photos of luxury high-rises, oblivious to the fact that her house of cards was about to come crashing down. After dinner, I excused myself to my office, pretending to work late on a project. In reality, I was drafting my own big reveal. I combed through the evidence I had: the texts, the financial statements, the pictures from the investigator. By the time I was done, I had compiled everything into a neat, damning package. I printed multiple copies and labeled each folder "Claire's Betrayal." The next morning, I called Greg's office and scheduled a meeting under the pretense of discussing Claire's promotion. His assistant was happy to pencil me in, completely unaware of what I had planned. When Saturday arrived, Claire kissed me goodbye before heading to Greg's office. She said she had one final meeting with him before leaving for Chicago the next day. "Wish me luck," she said with a wink. "You won't need it," I replied, smiling. An hour later, I walked into Greg's office, carrying the folder under my arm. He greeted me with his usual smarmy charm, gesturing for me to sit. "So, what can I do for you, Dan?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him. "You can start by explaining this." Greg's smug expression faltered as he opened the folder. His face turned pale as he flipped through the evidence: screenshots of texts, transaction records, and photos of him with Claire and Aaron. "What is this?" he stammered. "This," I said evenly, "is everything I know about your little scheme with my wife. The money laundering. The affair. The planned divorce. You thought I was an idiot, Greg, but you underestimated me." Greg opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, my voice icy. "You're going to drop Claire's promotion. You're going to cut off any financial ties with her or Aaron. And if you so much as think about retaliating, I'll send this folder to your board of directors, your clients, and the media. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are." Greg stared at me, his jaw clenched. "You don't have proof," he said weakly. "Try me," I said, standing up. Without another word, I walked out of his office, leaving him to stew in his own panic. Claire's game wasn't over yet, but now, I had the upper hand. The night before Claire's big move to Chicago, I decided it was time to end the charade. She came home from Greg's office looking triumphant, practically glowing with excitement. She talked animatedly over dinner about all the possibilities her new position would bring. She told me about how grateful Greg was for her hard work and how much she would miss the house, but how this was the right step for us. Us. The audacity of that word almost made me laugh out loud. I nodded along, acting supportive, letting her enjoy her fantasy world for just a little longer. The truth, I knew, would hit her like a wrecking ball, and I was more than ready to deliver it. After dinner, as she packed the last of her bags, I walked into the bedroom holding a familiar folder. "Claire," I said softly. She glanced up from her suitcase, smiling. "Yeah, babe?" I held up the folder. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "What's that? Why don't you have a seat?" I said, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the edge of the bed, eyeing me warily. I placed the folder on the nightstand and opened it, pulling out the first sheet of paper, a printed screenshot of her texts with Greg. The color drained from her face as she read the first few lines. What is this?" she stammered. "Oh, you know exactly what it is," I said, my voice steady. "It's proof, Claire. Proof of your affair with Greg. Proof of your little side payments. Proof that you and your boyfriend Aaron Michaels have been planning to take me for everything I have." Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. "Don't bother denying it," I said, pulling out more papers, bank statements, photos from the private investigator, and finally, the divorce papers she thought she'd spring on me after the move. "I know everything, Claire. Every text, every transaction, every disgusting detail." She looked like she'd been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Dan, I can explain." "No," I snapped, slamming the folder shut. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to lie to me anymore. This is done, Claire. You're done." Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually cry. But then, just as quickly, her expression shifted to something colder, harder. "You had someone follow me?" she said, her voice laced with anger. "You violated my privacy?" I laughed bitterly. "Privacy? That's rich, coming from the woman who's been sneaking around behind my back for months. Don't try to turn this around on me, Claire. You're the one who blew up our marriage." She stood, her eyes blazing. "You don't understand, Dan. I was suffocating in this life. You never saw it because you were too busy playing the perfect husband, but I needed more. I deserved more." "More?" I said, my voice rising. "You mean Greg and Aaron? That's your more? Stealing from me? Trying to ruin me?" "I didn't steal." "You did," I said, my tone cutting. "And it stops now. I've already frozen the accounts. I've filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity and financial misconduct. And Greg? He's done, too. I paid him a visit today. Let's just say he's more worried about saving his own skin than helping you anymore." Her eyes widened in panic. You didn't." "Oh, I did," I said, stepping closer. "You underestimated me, Claire. You thought I was clueless. But now you're the one who's out of moves." She stared at me, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to find the right words. But there was nothing left to say. "I'll give you 24 hours to pack your things and leave," I said, my voice cold. "You can stay at one of those hotels you seem to know so well. But by tomorrow night, I don't want to see your face in this house ever again." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. "Dan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. We can work this out." "No," I said, shaking my head. "We can't. You killed whatever we had, Claire. Now get out." She didn't argue. She knew it was over. The next day, as she carried the last of her bags to her car, I stood in the doorway, watching her go. She looked back once, her face a mix of anger, regret, and desperation. I didn't say a word. When she drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't joy, exactly, it was something quieter, heavier. But it was the beginning of something new. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The game was over. And I had won.